I don't know how to top that. Okay, so we're going to talk about predictive analytics. So I'm going to introduce our panel. Sitting next to me, we have Eric Carlisle. Eric is the Chief Knowledge Architect at Ignition One. I do not know what that means, but it sounds really cool. Next to Eric is Claudia Perlich, Chief Scientist, right? At is the company M60 or what's the full name of the company?
Media 6 Degrees,
Media
M60.
6 Degrees. Okay. Next, we have Bill Seeley, the Vice President of Optimization and Analytics at X+1.
Good to be
Hey,
here.
Bill. And Alex Yoder, who's the CEO of WebTrends.
Hi. By the way, the most valuable thing I can do while I'm here is buy y'all a drink. So if you didn't get a chip for a drink at the registration table, or I have them for you. So
I just got one.
Yeah, he got one.
Yeah, I think we all should probably have had a few before this. And we're going to talk about predictive analytics because, as Judah said, perhaps predictive analytics is just a new buzzword that's been repackaging what we've been doing all along. Perhaps it's not. There's a lot of noise in the space. Suddenly everything's about predictive analytics this, predictive analytics that, and it sounds really great, but what really is it? So let's start with defining predictive analytics. Who'd like to take it away? What is predictive analytics, and why is it different than what we've been doing before?
Well, I take the most basic approach because I think Claudia will have a really good, solid, scientifically oriented answer. But I mean, it doesn't necessarily, in my mind, and I tell my staff this all the time, it doesn't have to be what different from what we were doing before. I think in the end, the goal is to take a set of information and try and derive some kind of meaning out of it that you can use to a later effect. And that can literally mean anything from a group of people sitting there and looking at folks walking into an arena and deriving some behavioral insight out of it to obviously using mathematics for it. And I think that's the important thing is your question is right on. I mean, nothing has fundamentally changed. The means and methods have become a little more sophisticated, and the volume of data, obviously, in channels is maybe greater, but the desired outcome and goals are still all the same.
And Claudia, could you explain why Alex is wrong about that?
I do see a continuum of what you do with data, and what I like about predictive analytics, and I'm not going to bore you with the relative value of a naive Bayes with a logistic regression, you just leave your preconceived notions at the door. You walk into the room of data and say, all right, what's up? Maybe your audience really is the affluent teenager. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe there's something you really don't know. And I think that's really what I love about it. There's honesty in data if you do it right. It's not easy to do it right, but there is truth, at least as far as I'm concerned. And if you ask the right way, it can tell you something you really didn't know before. And that's what I love about predictive analytics or data analytics.
Yeah. So let me ask, though, what's changed? Is it just the label that's changed, or is something new happening?
I think that you have a whole lot of real-time decisions that have to be made and can't be made off of crosstabs anymore and need to be made off of coefficients. And to the extent that predictive analytics is about coming up with coefficients to explain how data is interacting and putting them in line in terms of real-time decision making, that's the difference between predictive analytics and what has generally happened in the past.
And I'd add that the underlying requirements for making sure that you know what you think you know at the end of it all have not changed. So the fact that you want to do something based on the data on the order of minutes, hours, doesn't change the risks of lack of rigor. So being in a hurry and getting the data quickly, getting lots of data quickly, and acting on it quickly doesn't absolve us from having to do a good job of making sure we know what's in there.
Just to add to that, I mean, I'd get back to what Judah said earlier. I think that the key is, at least in my view, contemporary society loves to get caught up in the complexity and the catchwords. But it does come back ultimately to trying to drive a business result. And predictive analytics have been used, arguably for centuries. They certainly are in practice today very actively and have been for decades in the financial systems that are used for commodity and stock trading. I was a commodity trader for a long time, so familiar with it. We were talking about in the lobby out there some of the GPS systems that now route you based on the density of the traffic. I mean, that's predictive analytics. It's not mystical. It's nothing superficial. It's truly in practice. We use it every day without realizing it. I think people frequently just get very excited about some of the nuances of it and get afraid of it.
So let me just ask each of you for a good example. Right? When you think of an example of predictive analytics, you used the GPS example. What are some examples you might use? So, Bill.
Well, I think, coming from where I work, the first examples that come to me are I am making a decision dynamically about what to show each person that lands on a website, on the front page of a website. What's going to be in the big hero image? What's going to be in the little images below that? What messages, what products. And so I can do that with data in a number of ways. I can just listen to my client and they'll just give me rules. If they're on the West Coast, do this. If they're on the East Coast, do that. If they have 3 children, do that. Or I can do a designed experiment to collect data and then either build rules or a model to determine how I'm going to make that decision. So I can do it algorithmically, I can do it a priori, but either way, the idea is I'm collecting information about who responds to what, and then I'm doing something to implement that decision real time.
So, Claudia, what's your favorite example?
Well, there is the conventional use, if you want to say that. Yes, we find the people who are most likely interested in your product, and we do that using predictive analytics. What I find more interesting is understanding details around when would you really want to reach out to these people. And you can, again, use predictive analytics to determine that while you're reading the syntax of SQL, you're probably not very perceptive to an ad on whatever it is, even if you're in general interested in pizza. Right now, probably not. And that's, again, where analytics can help us prioritize when we should be showing ads. And I find this a very interesting capability to explore.
Okay, so a lot of what I've heard is that we're trying to use predictive analytics to drive better ROI. Are we even measuring the ROI right in the first place? So I'm going to go back to Claudia on that because I believe you have some opinions.
I don't want to get back into the measurement discussion because we had plenty of that already today. I think we're starting to look beyond the streetlight where there's the light in the right places. We have to push this further when it comes to attribution, all the discussion that Joel just had on using the right analytical tools to find it. We have been measuring ROI, people running A/B tests on a regular basis, not as often as they might. And I think we see it. We also see examples where analytics tells you there actually isn't any, and the reason is that you're actually optimizing the wrong metric. We've seen that too, and that's something people don't like to hear, but often analytics dispels illusions about ROI as well.
Okay. Yeah, one of the challenges of analytics is you might actually get a good estimate of what's happening, and you might not like your answer. So, okay, so one of the things I'm particularly interested in, because I'm on the agency side of the business, is brands and branding. And we have a lot of brands that use predictive analytics. They just don't really know it because predictive analytics is built so far into the system, so deep into the system. People use predictive analytics to drive better ROI, but they also use predictive analytics to drive classification systems. So, for example, if you're an advertiser and you're buying moms, you will actually be using tools that use predictive analytics to do things like lookalike segments and on all that sort of stuff. In that environment, in that brand environment, Do you think that there needs to be more openness and transparency about how all this stuff works? To get more branding dollars to drive into this audience prediction?
I think that trying to oversimplify things for the client by showing them a smiling picture of some representative of the segment that indexes 104 as being the constituency, the entire constituency of that segment would be a start. In other words, the reality is way more complicated than the personae that usually get used as the selling tool, and it conceals more than it helps.
I mean, as an abstraction, these segments that we end up buying, we need to realize that they are just an abstraction. I mean, all the data providers that are going out and tagging your audience samples and your audience segments, they're abstractions. They don't know. But I think it's absolutely imperative that we understand where they are getting that data from, and that they are constantly on the hook from us as the buyers of those audience segments or those particular data aggregation tools. It's absolutely critical for us to be challenging them at all points.
So do you see the need for someone to basically validate and police the predictive analytics industry?
I mean, not the predictive analytics industry alone, but yeah, I mean, I think agencies should be held accountable to an auditing third party. I mean, look, Google alone is a self-auditing entity, right? So, I mean, it's pretty common practice in our world today that they send you a bill based on the number of clicks that they tell you that you got versus the number that you believe you got. So I think that there should absolutely be greater transparency in terms of the inputs and the outcome, and the closer you can get to an independent third party, the better. It's all a continuum over time, I think. But I think the flip side of that equation is that when you look at the concept of bringing marketing and technology together in of itself, it's probably one of the most complex problems in the history of technology and of it, because of the different natures. So you don't want to overcomplicate it either. I think you really want to focus on the very simple and straightforward. I mean, I always tell my staff, marketers don't wake up in the morning thinking about buying technology. That's not their goal. So what are they focused on buying? They're focused on buying an end result. Let's focus on how we can talk to them about that result, help deliver that end result, and satisfy their end need for what they're paying for. And functionally, I don't think that the technology only and the agency only world live for much longer independently. I think they have to coexist.
Okay, so
well, could you have an analytics only practice that was like be the analytics agency of record that doesn't sell advertising, that doesn't sell creative, that doesn't sell anything except the analysis? Because otherwise, what you're doing is it's just like being in a football game, and then anytime there's a controversial call, you ask the biggest guy on the field to decide what was right.
Mm-hmm. And there are some examples of analytics-only agencies, but they're very few and far in between. Most agencies that do a lot of analytics wind up bundling that with something else.
I mean, if I can propose something that's really preposterous here, and it's never going to happen, but realistically, if the kind of 5 major holding companies bought an analytics company together and held it independently, and it was run by a third party, and used it for validation of the practice that they are delivering to their clients, I think that it would be a benefit not only to the end users, but it would help. I mean, I'm on the board of the Web Analytics Association, and standardization is the biggest challenge and problem. And I mean, I hate to say it, but I think it's going to be really hard to ever, it's a continuum, but it's going to be hard to really ever get to a point of true standardization across the entire ecosystem. And there's a lot of people who are incented for it not to be.
Mm-hmm. Right, and then you just want to watch out for it turning out to be a limiter standardization as a limiter of innovation and progress.
Yeah,
which
I would agree
kind
with
of
that.
TV would be a good example of that.
Yeah, I definitely don't disagree.
Okay. So what could agencies do better to better understand this world? Keeping in mind you're speaking to an agency guy who is also the moderator.
Wow. What can agencies do better?
Yeah, tell me what I'm doing wrong and how I can fix it.
I think there's traditionally a disconnect between, as a technology provider here, and that's there's traditionally a disconnect between what needs to be done in order to run a campaign effectively and the story that needs to be told by the agency in terms of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And to me, that is the biggest disconnect. A lot of times, I can tell you the campaign is working fantastic, but I can't tell you why.
That's exactly the point that we are running into. There is some amount of incentives of what people judge things by, and the fact, look, it works really well, somehow often doesn't get quite the ear that you would expect it to do, because it is hard to really grapple with the reality of what the analytics tools do. And I just would really like to have more dialogue about it and attempts of understanding and going beyond cute stories that may be easy sells, but not the truth.
Right, and so some of that is trying to model the mechanisms by which these effects are happening, instead of just measuring lift and saying, look, it went up. You know, having some kind of breakdown or allocation or, you know, coefficients, I think was the word used earlier, you know, that are believable, that really correspond to the mechanisms by which people respond.
How many times could you go and take a set of coefficients and go to one of your clients and sit there and say, these are the things that are driving, and this is the relative proportions that it is driving against it, and your client's eyes are going to glaze over.
Right.
I can guarantee you their eyes are going to glaze over.
Well, not our clients, but other
Where I
ones.
think there's been a
See that.
disconnect, to be fair, I mean, and you know, I'm running a technology company, where I think there's been a disconnect, to be fair, is you know, I don't think that ultimately the technology-only model or the agency-only model works moving forward. And the reason I'll say that is because, you know, if you look at just a random Coca-Cola as a brand, right? I mean, they're paying the agency, they're paying the technology company. And let me just be very generic and generalistic here, but, you know, the agencies always tell the brand, well, those guys don't know how to build technology, it's buggy, it sucks, everything else. Technology company always tells the brand, well, they don't know how to use the technology, they're not smart enough and aren't incented to give you the true answers. That's generally the kind of discussion. And in the end, the biggest problem with that is that the entity that is paying both parties is not getting value. And I mean, I'm kind of a believer in pure economic rationalization, and so I do think that over time, the market will have to rationalize itself to getting the agency or the brand, the value that they're actually paying for, instead of hearing a story from the technology company and from the agency that are somewhat independent and not validated between the two. I mean, the way that we're approaching that is we're building our own performance marketing agency within our company. I don't think that's the long-term answer, but it certainly is helping, I think.
So I guess then this gets to the next question. It's a nice transition. I'm going to ask you each to make one bold prediction about the future of predictive analytics. And keep in mind this is being recorded, and so in 2 years we're going to come back and see which ones of you got it right and then mock the ones that didn't. So
I better get off stage now.
So knowing that you will be mocked, please make one bold prediction. So Alex, I want to start with you. What does the world
Can I
look
go
like?
last? I mean, that's at least...
Okay, Eric.
2 years.
Fair
Okay.
enough, Eric. I'm going to start with you. 2 years from now, bold prediction.
And it was 3 in the, in our,
Yeah.
when we were talking before. So now
Okay, change the rules,
You've
3.
now just compressed the time frame, slightly for me. So I honestly believe that if, as technology providers, we do not get the predictive analytic components closer to the people who are actually making the decisions, we have failed in 3 years from now? And I go back to, and I was hedge fund manager for 5 years, a statistical arbitrage hedge fund. I go back and look at the trading type of systems that we used to have 10, 15 years ago, before I got into this gig. And now I look at what is available to us, to the average everyday consumer. It's the stuff of dreams that we dreamed about 10 years ago. And so I honestly believe that as a technology provider, my job is to take these complex statistical models and predictive analytics and be able to bring them to the individual user on an everyday basis. Because if he's not using, to the everyday media manager decision every day, and if not, we failed.
So my bold prediction was that, for the most part, I'm going to say that very little will change, at least on the level of perception. I think the friction, we will stand here in 2 years and we will debate still the value, because we haven't figured out really how to measure it yet. I think the use should get closer to the people. I don't think that everybody will be able to do predictive modeling. And the one data point I have is that I was on the Global Technology Outlook of IBM in 2009. And guess what that was about?
Predictive modeling?
Exactly. And guess
I'm
what
good.
has changed since?
Okay, so you have a big vote for nothing. Bill?
I think some important things will change. I think you're going to have more data that's easier to connect between different sources. I think you're going to have a lot faster processing and a lot better user interface tools, we'll say, for getting to the results of predictive analytics. But in order to really make something out of it, there's going to have to be another thing that happens, and I hope that happens in the next 2 years, which is the rise of the numbers-savvy marketer.
So that's a good segue for me.
Yeah, because you're just starting off there with Moore's Law, so that was real brave. But I like the second part.
Well, it's more 3 years, so I'll try and keep this abbreviated and not explain all the background. But roughly, I think that, and actually, Eric, I need to talk to you afterwards so you can validate this, whether this is right or not. But I think the economy overall moves in roughly 7-year cycles. 94 to 01, from 01 to 08, 08 to 15. Usually the biggest inhibitor to technology adoption is not the availability or the persistence of the technology. It's human beings and unwillingness to drive change within their organizations. The only thing that drives change within an organization fundamentally is fear of losing your job, and that typically comes at a time of a big economic downturn. So in 2015, when we have another market crash, I think we are going to see much broader adoption of predictive analytics as a result of the same thing we saw in 94, 01, and 08, which was essentially the C-level execs saying to their staff, "You've been telling me that digital is the most measurable for all these years. Let's do something with it." And they'll have to go and make some decisions about how to actually provide some measurable result. And it'll be valuable, but it comes as the result of pain avoidance.
Now I have another sort of follow-up question to this. If the tools for predictive analytics go wild and suddenly everyone starts using them, they're easier to use, doesn't that mean that a lot of people are going to do a lot of really bad predictive analytics? And what do we do about that?
What's bad?
Yeah, what is bad? I mean, because there's learning in everything. And so, one of the things that we stress over and over again is this whole culture of testing, that you cannot just maintain status quo in the web space, in any place that you constantly have to be testing. And if there are bad predictive models that are created and recognized and solved before too much damage is done, and hopefully the systems are designed around that type of reactionary that it isn't working, I don't think there's nearly as much harm as as what can and is currently happening with a variety of non-predictive analytic changes that are being introduced into campaigns.
So the one thing I have to emphasize, and it echoes the previous statement, it's not just about giving people a really strong engine with 1,000 PS to drive on, you'd better make clear how the brakes work. And I think that's the thing people need to understand. It's not about the tooling. It sounds flashy, all these nice models that you have at your fingertips and the data all over and the beautiful visualization. It's cool. I think the worst that can happen, that people try it and they fail to recognize it early enough, and they walk away discouraged and saying it doesn't work just because they haven't been taught where the brake is. I think we should really emphasize that and make it part of the education. It's not just the beautiful rainbow and all the fluff. It is hard. There's no way around it.
I think the best gun in the world doesn't make someone into an awesome marksman. So essentially, you have to have great marketing tool users. That's what I was talking about, the rise of the number-savvy marketer. That has to catch up with as the tools get slicker, the thinking has to get more statistically savvy. It can't just be, give me the answer. It has to, the marketers have to be concerned about where did this information come from, why should I believe it, what was the data hygiene behind it, what was the methodology, the test design, and have a point of view about those things.
I don't know, what was the question again? There were such good answers, I forgot the question.
Yeah, the question is as the tools become more commonplace, is there a danger that you'll have a lot of people doing a very poor job with these tools?
I think, it's so subjective, it's hard to answer. I mean, I view everything in the world as a continuum. And so nothing, again, I'm not so behavioral as I'm sounding today, but human beings like to look at things from the standpoint of being an end state because it's easier to conceive of and to grasp. There is no end state to this. So what we talk about today will seem small and old tomorrow, and that will absolutely continue. So I think everything that we're doing is constantly evolving at a more rapid pace and getting better and better and better. Yes, there will be mistakes made along the way. Yes, there will be some bad, predictive analytics. But I think to Eric's point, there will be learning in it. And out of that learning is what creates better modeling. And ultimately, the better modeling is what allows us to continue to improve exactly what we're doing. I don't think there's ever an end to that.
Okay, well then, as we talk about the rise of the data-driven marketer, the rise of the analytic marketer, what can we do as an industry to get more bodies, more qualified bodies in those spots faster? How can we help accelerate this process from a human perspective? So, because that's a problem we've got, is being able to hire. There's tremendous marketplace competition. I'm sure it's a problem you've all got.
Absolutely.
So what can we do to help at least mitigate this problem a little bit? So I'm going to turn this over to Alex because he's sitting next.
Well, I mean, I think, so I'm on the board of the Web Analytics Association, and I'm, can't remember, like the liaison for the education committee, I think is what they called me. But, education, certification is certainly helpful, I think. But, in the end, I do feel like that underneath it all, it's a generational thing, and it's something that, unfortunately, only time can really help evolve. I mean, in 2005 or 6, right in there, I was selling a fully predictive behavioral targeting solution that, made the decision in real time and served the content. And the biggest challenge in that case was the product did everything for you, basically, except for create the content. But people were uncomfortable with a machine making a decision for you. So I think younger generations growing and evolving into these roles and becoming more comfortable with multi-screen real-time environments is going to drive that forward pretty significantly. I think Judah and I are fundamentally aligned in the sense that I think it has to come down to either making money or saving money in some capacity. And that's, the more that we can, I think, represent examples of that in the marketplace for all of us and for everyone involved, the greater the adoption will be, and the faster the hiring will be.
Bill.
Well, the one caveat there is that just having a higher salary associated with it, or having some sort of, I hesitate to use the word glamour with analytics, but associated with it, would not necessarily increase the supply. A person cannot just decide they're interested in this and make themselves good at it. My experience is that there are people with potential to absorb it, and then people who, even if they tried, would never get it. And so that is kind of a limiter to the supply of analysts. And so it's really sort of competing with schools of electrical engineering or computer science departments. You're not trying to take a person who's studying marketing necessarily. You're trying to take somebody who's in a quantitative field and then inspire them and say, if you really want to have an exciting, interesting career where everything isn't already laid out, marketing analytics is where you should go.
So looking back to exactly the point on supply and demand, one hobby of mine is I'm teaching a class in the part-time MBA of NYU on exactly that. Analytics for business intelligence. I actually disagree. I mean, you can pick up good technical people in computer science departments. I do think we need to get to the marketing people, and that's what I'm trying to reach out to. And I think we as an industry should put more pressure on schools. I know that Columbia has an effort writing a proposal on big data and analytics in general. I think it's our challenge to go and tell, this is the type of people we need, and that's the education that we are willing to pay for because we think this is the future, and that way it trickles down to really make sure we have the supply of qualified people who understand both the business side and the analytics.
Yeah, along those same lines, we've teamed up with Georgia Tech down in Atlanta, which is where I'm from, and
It's a good school.
and they do an absolutely fantastic job of showcasing the way that we are changing, in the models that we are creating. So I love that, I love that partnership, and it's something that I think, we can work with their professors and we work with their students and help them with research projects along the way. Not to be morose but the best thing that happened to us in terms of being able to find high quality data scientists was when the market crashed. I mean, Wall Street was just rife with people that were being laid off, and we went out and plucked as many as we possibly could. And so that would be another easy way for us to fill our ranks, but nobody really wants that.
Okay, well, with that, so let's see if we've got wait, push the universities, and hope for another Wall Street crash. Those are the three strategies. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to try and get the schedule back on track. So I'm going to open it up for a couple questions. If anyone has any questions for the panel, make them good, make them provocative. I believe there's one in the back.
So you presented several different problems of what might be existing in predictive analytics, data accountability, connecting business to the analytics community and whatnot. And it seems to me the most important feature that is almost broadly solving all these problems is the right measurement. If you've got more data analysts coming and producing bad models, well, if you're measuring it correctly, you smell it out right away. If you're bringing in bad data and you're measuring it correctly, instantly it's held accountable. I mean, of course, with branded advertising, that's challenged because what exactly are you measuring? But I don't know if this is so much of a question or of a statement, but maybe a point for discussion. But one of the problems with measurement is there doesn't seem to be a standard by which anything is measured. I think within the analytics community, there's lift curves, there's receiver operator curves that it's a common language, but between the business community and the analytics community, there are very few standard metrics that I can just go to any marketing person and say, here's the result of my analysis, and then they can smell out right away if this was good or bad. So I guess, can you propose some ideas on what that kind of common measurement language could be?
So who wants to take that? Common measurement standards.
Well, I mean,
Maybe someone
I'm
from
not
the
trying to
WA.
sound stupid, but it comes down to dollars. I mean, I don't know what else you can really use. I mean, there's nothing else that's ultimately a proxy for making those decisions. And when you think about it, even in a standardized sense, I mean, I think the world we deal with today, most individual businesses establish their own KPIs, right? So you measure against those KPIs, but ultimately, what are they trying to derive or get to? You know, in the context of marketing, it's am I saving money or making money? And there's a variety of ways to do that. I mean, instead of buying lists now, you know, the data is available more broadly in the social spectrum. So you can, as long as you can structure and capture the data, you can actually start to create your own customer profiles. That's a way of saving money and driving more insight into the business. But that's the only KPI that really ultimately matters. And I think until our industry fundamentally embraces that, you know, it's going to continue to be a challenge. I mean, I've been saying for 4 years, I'm the CEO of a company, and if somebody comes to me and says, I want to spend $100,000 on a campaign, and I say, great, what am I going to get for it? And they say, you know, more fans or more unique visitors or more, you know, clicks or whatever. That's just not a currency that translates for me.
And I have to agree. In any predictive analytic process that you go under, if they can't tell you or give you a forecast in terms of what the lift or what the change is actually going to be, I don't have a whole lot of confidence in it. And if they're not able to relate that back to the business aspects, the dollars, and say, with this particular model, I expect X to happen, X more to happen, modeling for the sake of, you know, without the ability to be able to predict what the actual impact is going to be, doesn't do any good.
I'll pick a bone with that one. Not really answering your question on measurement, which I think is a very important one, but you do need to allow for experimentation. I mean, you have to try it. You can't sit there and say, well, you tell me what the lift's going to be, and if you can't promise it's 5, I'm not going to do it. I think that's not going to move the experience along. We have to try more things and then check whether they work, whether these are trials. It is fundamentally impossible, I'm putting the science hat on right now, until I've seen the data and spent a good week with it, there's no way for me to tell what the lift's going to be. And if you don't give me that chance, we will not have predictive modeling.
Right. So the one other measurement thing I want to throw in there is that you can have the right KPI, you can have the right metric for the outcome, and you can have a pretty good idea of what the stimulus was. But if your model for relating those two is fundamentally flawed or oversimplified, like say last click attribution, then what you will do in the case of last click attribution, for instance, is I'm going to give people credit for tagging somebody right before they step across the line and very little credit to early funnel activity. So you have to think about the displacements that the simplifications you make cause and think about what really happened. What really happened is a number of touches happens over a period of time in a bunch of different channels, and then somebody either did or didn't do what you wanted them to do. How are we going to model that?
I think this raises also, back to the more the analytics side, I mean, it definitely raises the importance of real time. And you know, a lot of people talk about, well, what's the value of real time? I mean, I fundamentally believe that the notion of kind of running 2 or 3 big campaigns a year that cost 30% of your budget are maybe not over, but they're diminishing pretty rapidly, because what you have instead is practitioners that are engaged in launching campaigns multiple times over the course of a week, and across, you know, the social media spectrum as an example, in a unified and branded way, and then measuring those that are successful and allowing them to, you know, take off virally, and those that are not successful, rapidly taking them offline. Back to the experimentation notion. I mean, that is a very important part of the marketing function, I think, both today and moving forward, and that will continue, I think, to evolve and become more and more important. So real-time measurement, the ability to iterate and take on and off. We measured like 20,000 Facebook campaigns and found that the average shelf life of a Facebook campaign was about 11 hours. So you know, the majority of them, I mean, it takes truly really rapid iteration, learning, and then action.
Okay. Any other questions before lunch? Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. Thank you to the panelists.